Well, hello and welcome to the Pastor Study. We're in our series looking at several books, particularly one, The Benedict option, and we're with that looking at Strangers in a Strange Land and the book Out of the Ashes. But primarily the Benedict option. We're up to chapter 9, and the ninth chapter of the Benedict option focuses on sexuality, marriage, and reproduction. This is a major issue for Christians today, and the subject is addressed in the other two books that we're reading. So in Strangers in a Strange Land, it's really covered in the chapter 5, Love Among the Eloi. In Out of the Ashes, it's the subject of two chapters, chapter 5 and 6, Restoring Manhood and Restoring Womanhood. Now, it's not possible to even introduce the content of these three books in 15 minutes. So what I intend to do is cover the primary issues and terms in this session, and then give additional detail in following videos. So this chapter from the Benedict option will actually be covered in multiple episodes. So for Judaism and Christianity, gender, marriage, sexuality, and reproduction are all connected and integrated into the religious notion of marriage and family. And that is treated as a religious norm, a command from God and controlled within the religious community. And then from that framework extends into the larger community and society. But for American culture, these four things, gender, marriage, sexuality, and reproduction, have really been separated so that sexuality and gender identity are primarily personal individual concerns, while marriage and reproduction, which are also now separated from each other, are merely options for humans to consider. And the problem for Jews and for Christians in all of this is that we are largely assimilated into the culture, so that we tend to separate these things in our own thinking as well. So I want to briefly address each of these from the biblical perspective, and in the next several videos, I'll contrast the current cultural perspective regarding them with the biblical and religious ones. So let's begin with gender. The scriptures do not address sexual orientation or sexual identity. They simply don't talk about that. Those are contemporary concepts. When the Bible addresses gender, it speaks of male and female. And this is tied to the beginning or the creation of mankind. So Genesis says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 28, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, and over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." And God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And he said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves. So biblically, male and female are the gender categories for all the commands, all the roles, and the persons described in the Bible. These categories of male and female are treated from that perspective. And related to that is this idea of reproduction. So, reproduction. After creating male and female, God says to them, be fruitful and multiply. So it's clear that reproduction is a primary purpose for God creating us as male and female. And this implies and anticipates the instruction of that reproduction and the parenting of the children who are born. And the commandments tell God's people how this is to be done among those who know the living God. Now, marriage. The other purpose for human beings being male and female, and there really are only two purposes. There's no real reason for us to be male and female other than reproduction and what we call marriage. So in Genesis chapter 2, God gives us a detailed explanation, a narrative of the making of Adam and Eve. And this focuses on companionship between the husband and wife. After saying it is good, it is good, it is good, it is very good as God creates, God says, it's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a companion suitable for him. So taken from Adam, Eve is made and brought to Adam, and he's pleased with this. And the scripture says, for this cause, a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and they shall be echad, one, a phrase used in the Shema regarding God. The Lord is one, echad. So the roles of husband and wife then become prescribed in the scriptures, making these roles reciprocal but not identical. The role of the husband and the role of the wife. And the idea is that in some sense, man and woman are incomplete, particularly man is incomplete without marriage. So for Judaism and Christianity, marriage is normative. We'll talk about exceptions to that in later videos. So sexuality. While the Bible is aware that sexual behavior happens between a man and women, it also happens between men and women who are not married, between animals and humans, and between members of the same gender, and between members who are close relatives. It forbids such behavior that is not married, between humans and animals, between humans of the same gender, and between close relatives. It forbids that under a covenant for Jews. And in that covenant found in Leviticus chapter 18, it includes the Gentiles who dwell with Israel. This is the holiness code of Judaism and also Christianity. And as the sexual commands are mentioned, they become part of the Acts 15 requirements for Gentile believers. In this sense, the Bible has no comment or awareness of sexual orientation and attraction or as identity. What the scripture talks about is behavior, which is regulated towards marriage and reproduction for God's people. Now, in the last 100 years, the American culture has moved from a compatibility with the Judeo-Christian holiness code that integrates and combines gender, marriage, sexuality, and reproduction, established for those who worship and serve the God of Abraham. The American culture has moved from compatibility with that to a secular, highly individualized, and personal notion of identity, sexuality, sexual orientation, and choice in reproduction. Today, for most Americans, and unfortunately for many Jews and Christians, gender, sexuality, marriage, and reproduction are separate and distinct issues that no longer integrate unless you want them to, and can be addressed individually without consideration of the others. This change has put biblical adherents in opposition with the progressive activists within our culture. And the result is a culture war of values and a battle over religious freedom and expression in the public domain, which is the subject of the books that we're reading. Now, the problem is that many on the religious side of the argument want the culture to conform to the scriptures. So they are trying to impose the Judeo-Christian view on the culture at a time when the culture is not interested in that. On the other hand, the progressives want the religious to conform to the emerging culture. And this is an unresolvable conflict in some ways. But the scripture gives us a different way to look at this. And that is the call of the Benedict option and strangers in a strange land. And so in the next couple of episodes, we're going to look at these perspectives in more detail. We're going to look at gender, we're going to look at marriage, we're going to look at sexuality, and we're going to look at reproduction. We'll see how the Bible combines these for God's people in a way that is meaningful and that can be taught to our children and our converts, but not enforced on the culture around us. And we'll compare that with the culture's perspective and at least try to understand why what we're doing makes so little sense to them. So that will be the subject of our next videos. We'll take those one at a time. I don't know if I'll do one or two at a time, but we'll cover each of those and look at information from the books. So until then, I'll see you later.